welcome back. This is Matt Chat 172, featuring the third and final installment of my interview with Mr. Josh Sawyer. In this segment, we're talking about the Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas games, Alpha Protocol, Dungeon Siege 3, and what Josh thinks it takes to get a good job in the games industry. A lot of great stuff in this episode, so without further ado, here is Mr. Josh Sawyer.
Let's jump ahead here to New Vegas, Fallout New Vegas, which debuted in 2010. I just actually finished that game. This is my second time through it just a couple weeks ago, so it's kind of fresh in my head. And you know, as somebody who, you know, both of us have a great love of the first Fallout games as well. So I'm just wondering, do you think that before we talk about New Vegas, but do you think Bethesda really nailed it with their Fallout 3? Or do you think they lost something when they were transitioning from those older games to the new ones?
Well, I mean, I think they did exactly what they said they were going to do. I mean, they sort of said, we excel at making games that are first person, sort of exploration experience, and they focus heavily on atmosphere and things like that. I think that, like, Fallout 3 doesn't really, obviously it doesn't feel like Fallout 1 mechanically at all. I think that they did do, they did a pretty good job of sort of making sure that specific elements transferred over, but they also clearly wanted to put their own stamp on it. So it's like, how much is that game like Fallout 1? Not tremendously, but I also don't think that's actually what they were trying to do. I think they were trying to capture some of the atmospheric qualities of it, but I don't think they were really setting out to just copy what had been done before.
Well, personally, and I know a lot of people feel this way, that New Vegas is a better game than Fallout 3. And I'm just wondering, as you were making New Vegas, what did you see as areas of Bethesda's game that you wanted to work on? Is there anything looking back that you would have done differently?
Well, I think with New Vegas, I mean, what I sort of recognized had sort of happened in Fallout 3 is that Bethesda made a game around Bethesda. Like, they made a game set in a part of the country where they lived, and so it was familiar to them. And so they were taking a lot of the things that you recognize from the Fallout universe, but they were putting them in really a new setting, at least a new part of the country. So, we said, like, well, why don't we bring this game back over to the West Coast, and we can deal with a lot of the stuff that we're familiar with in the places that, I mean, any of us can drive to the Mojave Desert in a matter of hours. So this is something that we were really familiar with. So we said, well, when we talked at Black Isle about making Fallout 3, we wanted to deal with what would happen with the NCR, what would happen with Brotherhood of Steel, what would happen with these various groups. We had talked about ideas of groups like Caesar's Legion and stuff like that. So we really said, like, let's try to evolve Fallout 2 essentially. Let's say Fallout 2 happened, it was resolved in a certain way, and how do these groups move forward, and how do we introduce new factions into the mix so it doesn't just feel like we're rehashing a bunch of stuff. So that was what we looked at setting wise. Mechanically, I really wanted to make sure that the player had a lot of control over what factions they allied with. Not only that, but I wanted to make sure that the player, it was done on a sliding scale where they sort of felt that over time they were digging their heels in. Their choices were making them dig their heels in more and more with a specific faction, but that it was kind of flexible. You can play these sides off of each other for a while, but eventually you're kind of going to have to make a choice one way or another. But I feel like we communicated that pretty well to the player. I also feel like I wanted to make it so that choices you make early, mid-game, and in the late game all have, can have pretty big effects on how things go. I didn't want it to just be like, you make a choice at the beginning, you're locked into it. You make a choice halfway through the game, you're locked in, or you make a choice right at the end, which I think it can feel kind of cheap in a lot of cases. But I think we did a pretty good job of that. And I think the designers, they really took it to heart. We wanted to make sure that when you hit that ending, your ending, that ending consists of, like over a dozen different sets of things that each have different variable states and how they were resolved. And a lot of those are interlocked. So the state of one character might be tied not only to how you handled that character, but also to how you resolved Hoover Dam. And so by sort of interleaving all those choices, which I felt was very important, we wanted to make sure that the player felt all of these choices they made all over the place, maybe not every single one of them was super important, but they created this rich story for them where at the end of the game they could go, wow, like all this stuff, like I paid attention to all that stuff, and this is a really cool story that's tailored to what I did in the game. So we really wanted to nail that home. And then mechanically, it was mostly just trying to make the gameplay just more polished. So it's still a first-person game. We added in aim-down sights. We tweaked some of the VAT stuff. We added in, special moves for melee weapons. We added in a mod system because that's incredibly popular with end users. So it was really, from that perspective, just kind of adding in those other special features to extend the gameplay rather than trying to be really transformative about it, because Fallout 3 had established what Bethesda had wanted for the fundamental style of what the games are going to be.
I know usually when I play a game like New Vegas, I'm always looking for, okay, where's the good guys? What's the good faction? I really could never find one. I'm wondering, was that part of I'm guessing that was one of the design principles from early on, to not give the player a clear-cut path to like a paladin type class?
Yeah, what I wanted to do, and I don't think we fully, this is partially just a scheduling thing that is unfortunate, but my goal was to present the player with some easy assumptions that then get twisted over the course of the game. So you meet NCR and you go like, wow, these guys are, they're fighting the good fight, and they're really resisting tyranny, and Caesar's Legion is really terrible. And you encounter Caesar's Legion, you're like, these guys are really terrible. They're totally horrible. There's nothing redeeming about them at all. And then over the course of the game, what I wanted to do is have your perception of NCR twist. So you start to go like, well, like these soldiers are good guys, but man, things are really like, this is really being run terribly, and there's a lot of corruption, and like there's a lot of mid-level bureaucrats that are really pretty bad, and they're doing bad things. Wow, this is really hurting NCR to be here. This is kind of terrible. And then the hope was with Caesar's Legion to also show Caesar's Legion and say, there is a method to the madness, even if it is still mad. There is like a reason for it and a goal. And then what we also wanted to do, what we didn't have time to do, is to show other Legion controlled settlements where you could interact with people who, basically had very positive experiences with the Legion in spite of all the horrible things that they do. And the idea was sort of to twist that perception. So eventually you go like, NCR is not as good as they initially appear to be, and Caesar's Legion is not quite as terrible as they initially appear to be. The goal is really to make the player have a difficult choice to make, and also to keep them thinking throughout the game. I think that if you can make a decision and a call on something immediately, and you got another 50 hours to play, that's not really that mentally stimulating, because you're kind of disengaged, like, well, I decided to go with NCR, so I'm just going to keep going with it. But thankfully, I think people ran into a lot of places where I credit all the designers with this, all the individual designers, John Gonzalez, Eric Fenstermaker, Jeff Huskus, Akil Hooper, all those guys who did all these areas. They did a tremendous job of twisting the player's understanding of what was going on. So a lot of people were really happy to work with Mr. House. They're like, oh, Mr. House, he's kind of a weird dude, and he's really arrogant, and but he seems to kind of have a handle on things. And then he gets to the point where Mr. House says, you need to go blow up the Brotherhood of Steel. And people are like, that I don't want to do that. and people say like, well, but how about if I just talk to him? I can work around it. And he's like, no, just do what I say. Just go and blow him up. And a lot of people at that point were like, yeah, I'll be right back. I'm just going to go downstairs. And and then they decide it's time to turn on Mr. House. Or like when they get to Colonel Moore, and Colonel Moore basically advocates provoking the Kings into a fight that will kill all of them. And I sort of realized, like, what the hell is wrong with these people? Like, a lot of these high-ranking officers are really vindictive and petty, and this is kind of weird. So I think the designers did a really good job of making those choices difficult for the player. And I see a lot of people do switch allegiance. They go in one way, and halfway through the game, or 3/4 of the way through the game, they decide, I can't do this anymore. I changed my mind. I gotta go with this other group.
That's brilliant stuff. I like that you said you're making games that make players actually think and struggle with difficult issues. I have a question here from Alessandro Kellis. He wants to know about your mod for New Vegas. Why did you feel the need to create this, and why did you choose those particular elements to modify?
Well, there was a lot of stuff. After we put out the final patch for New Vegas, I knew that there were still a lot of unresolved issues, whether they're balance issues or just bugs, like mechanical bugs, that existed in the game. There's also a certain fundamental mechanical issue, specifically in how stuff gets run on the consoles, where when making patches, we can't address content that spans DLCs and the main game, which is a very technical thing. But basically, if I needed to solve a problem that persisted, that had a problem between like Honest Hearts and Old World Blues, or Gunrunner's Arsenal and Dead Money, I couldn't fix that in an official patch because it could crash on load on the consoles because of how load order is managed. Granted, on the PC, a lot of people use load order managers, so that's not an issue. As long as I put in my mod description that says you have to load things in this order, there's no problem. So I really wanted to fix those problems because they really bothered me. Like, there were a lot of inconsistencies and things that didn't really make much sense. Also, I think that the game overall was tuned to be pretty forgiving, and I recognized that a lot of players wanted something that was just tougher, that demanded more of them and was harsher in terms of damage, or how much their inventory choices they had to make and things like that. And so when I went in and did the mod, I tried to address all the major oversights and issues, all the stuff that was cross DLC. I tried to get all that stuff wrapped up, and then I went in and I did a balance pass to make things a little more hostile and lethal, and also to make it harder for the player to carry around an entire arsenal on his or her back. So the carry weight went way down, hit points went down. A lot of the tickers for the hardcore needs, the food and drink and sleep, that went up. So it just made it kind of harsher overall, and it was kind of just to get a feeling of a slightly more challenging game that was better balanced and had fixed a lot of the oversights that just technically weren't possible for us to fix in normal circumstances.
All right, so in 2010, and I guess also in 2010, we get Alpha Protocol. I've had Chris Avalon on, I think it was maybe actually that same year. And I don't think the game had come out yet, and he was really excited about it, and he got me really excited about it. You know, espionage RPG, that sounds like a winner to me. But it doesn't seem like the critics were as receptive to it as they should have been. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on Alpha Protocol?
Alpha Protocol was rough, I think, for a lot of people. We hadn't. I don't think a lot of us had worked with Unreal before, and a lot of us had not worked on shooters before, and we were trying to combine a lot of elements from different genres and finding the right way to balance them. And I think that it was hard, and it took a long time to kind of get to a place where we even felt comfortable with what was in the game. I didn't work on a ton of the game. I worked on pretty much exclusively the close quarters combat system, and that pretty much turned out how I had planned it to. I didn't mean for it to be particularly deep. I meant it to be something used at very close range, especially when using a gun would have been either frustrating or just kind of like not a great option. So very quick and flashy, and some kind of cool upgrades. So I was pretty happy with how that came out. But I think that there were a lot of mechanics that I don't think a lot of us internally felt were as polished as they could have been. I do believe, though, very strongly that the story-based choices and the dialogues that the team wrote into that game are really excellent. The way that it handles reactivity, I think, was really, really great. I feel like conversations felt like conversations. They didn't feel like you were cycling through a dialogue tree. You had to think quickly and pay attention, which I think was good. And they gave a lot of good feedback and reactivity to the choices that you made. And I think that even though it did have mechanical problems, I think that the people who do enjoy it, they enjoy it really for the very excellent way that the team handled choice and consequence, because I think that was really outstanding in that game.
All right, so the next year you were working on Dungeon Siege 3. I had Chris Taylor on in 2011, and again, he seemed really confident about the game. I, played the game; it's fun. I thought the reviews were just really harsh for that game. Here's one of the quotations: "Scooping up loot I think this is from IGN's review. Scooping up loot begins to feel like garbage collection instead of treasure hunting. I mean, is that fair, or is this guy just kind of being a butthead about this?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess different people want different things out of the game. I think that because it was called Dungeon Siege, there was a certain expectation of what it was going to be, and because it was on console, a lot of the sort of control schemes that had gone into Dungeon Siege 1 and 2 would have been pretty awful on console. So, and likewise, like we were sort of, we got some flack for our PC controls, but because the game was made for console, I think people went into it with an expectation of, like, either they expected it to not be good or they expected it to be like the PC games, and it wasn't. And which isn't to say that it didn't have some balancing flaws or things like that, but overall, I feel like that team actually did a pretty solid job on it. It wasn't a huge game. It wasn't made to be like an enormous blockbuster game, and so I think people had different expectations of it in a lot of ways than we did, which is unfortunate. But I think that the things that came out of it that I think were pretty solid is the combat mechanics were, I think, pretty well executed. And I think that the environments look really beautiful, which is good. And also, it was a very stable game. And for Obsidian, that's huge. I mean, that was the first game that we had made using our own technology. And so the fact that it had come out, it had very few bugs and was extremely stable, that was, like, even though the reviews weren't stellar for it, the fact that it ran for people and didn't crash and there weren't a lot of quest issues and stuff like that, that was really great because we had a kind of deserved reputation for having a lot of bugs in our game for a while.
All right, I have another viewer question. This is from Jerry. I think this is Rasanen maybe. He wants to know, what kind of game would you make if you were given total control and funding for it, either for today or maybe the near future's computers?
Total control. Well, there's not one. Like, there are a number of games. I actually had an idea for a game that I brought up a while ago, which was this idea of a game that is set in an alternate history, antebellum American South. And it's sort of it's basically like Magic gone wild and weird in the American South, actually all over the world. But it's all of these places around the world are sort of protected by their culture's spiritual guardians. But it's kind of hard to describe, but it's a very surreal world. It's one where it's like the world that we would understand in the late 19th century, but there are sort of just permeable barriers that transfer over into other realms of sort of spiritual, craziness. Like you can take a train from the southern tip of Florida to New Orleans directly, but you're actually going through hell on a train that goes through hell. And as long as you're comfortable doing that, that's totally fine. But you have to pay the train conductor, who is probably a spirit of death in some sort of otherworldly currency, or you're going to get sucked away into the netherworld. So just kind of a setting that is like an alternate history Earth that is also extremely magical and surreal, like not really putting the sort of boundaries on it that we would put on a traditional fantasy game, and just kind of being really wild about our ideas of what magic is, and just dealing with like what would happen if right in the Industrial Revolution magic didn't just appear as like kind of in a steampunk way. It wasn't like, oh, magic is here and we use it alongside technology, but like in magic tears apart the world. Like magic screws everything up. It's not something that people use. It's something that causes chaos in everyone's lives and changes how the entire world works. That's at least one idea that I'd have for a setting that I think would be really fun to explore.
I would definitely pledge for that, Josh. Here's another question from Jack. This is from Jack Day. And it's funny, we were talking about going through hell on a train. Reminded me of Grim Fandango for some reason. But he wants to know, what games do you feel deserve more attention than they got? Games like Grim Fandango and Tone Rebellion. So I mean, I guess what he wants to know is, what are your unsung heroes of the gaming world?
Games that I don't feel get enough credit. That's a good question. I really am bummed out about Darklands. Like, I really feel like a lot of people didn't catch it or don't know about it. In general, I wonder if people just don't like history games. I don't actually believe that's the case because there are a lot of really good historically based games with fantastic spins. I think Assassin's Creed is a pretty good example of a series that does it pretty well. Um, Games that don't get really enough credit. Yeah, Darklands is a big one. Even going back even farther, I think the old Fantasy series. Do you remember those games?
Oh,
Fantasy
the
Age.
SSI Fantasy 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. Those I think were really fun games. Trying to think of other ones that are really sort of classics for me. Um, no, I think most of the ones that I really like are the ones that other people really remember. The standouts like the gold box games and stuff like that. Something that I do think that people don't, a game that not a lot of people saw, but I thought was really a really interesting take. Some might say the first step towards, dare I say it, consoleization would be Hills. Do you remember Hillsfar?
Oh, Hillstar, yeah.
That was a weird game. That game played almost like an arcade game or like a set of mini games. Like you had lock picking mini games, you had horse riding mini games, you had the arena fighting mini games, and it was kind of strange, like trying to use D&D rules, but it kind of just presented them in a weird way. Also, I think a lot of people seem to forget about the Eye of the Beholder games. I know that when Grimrock came out, a lot of people were talking about Dungeon Master and stuff like that, but a lot of people were talking about Eye of the Beholder, which I think also had evolved that genre a lot. Also, the Lands of Lore games. I think we're doing some interesting things with that style of perspective. I actually went back recently and watched a Let's Play of Lands of Lore, and there's a lot of neat stuff in that game and like cool voice acting and stuff like that, and just a lot of puzzles, maybe too many puzzles, but those are a lot of fun to play.
All right, so the final question, this is something I ask everybody I have on the show. I teach at the university here, and a lot of students come in and ask me, hey, I heard you're the video games guy, so what do I need to do to get a job in the video games industry? So I'm just wondering, what would you tell these students, especially one that was interested in game design?
Well, it's different now than it was when I came in. And I don't just mean that from the perspective of what schooling, like what education is available. So one, I think that going to vocational schools is now like a viable sort of thing, whereas when I got in the industry, I don't think there were any, or if there were, they were very small or few in number. So going to a vocational school focused on game design education is a viable thing to look into, but there are a lot of different programs, and you have to find one that works for you. Um, make mods. Make mods. Make mods. I can't say that. Find a game that you like that allows you to make mods and make them. It really helps. It really helps you understand the sort of fundamental steps that go into working on something and the process of iteration, coming up with an idea, trying something, tuning it, trying it again. Send out your mod for feedback. Listen to what people say. Decide where do you draw the line between listening to feedback versus like sticking to a vision. Mods, I just make mods. There are so many tools out there to allow you to do it. There's probably something that you can use. Also, the great thing now is a lot of people think of getting into game design as going into a big company. But here's the thing, a lot of the big companies, they're collapsing. And that's sad in a sense because no one likes to see people losing their jobs. But a lot of these people are talented and they know what they're doing, and they're starting small companies. And there are a lot of small companies now that they're either kickstarting games or they're making small funded games. Some of those games, yes, they're mobile. Not all of them are, though. Some of them are just small PC games, they're tablet games. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. I really tremendously lucked out. I was incredibly lucky. Not only did I get a job in the game industry the first time I applied for a job, but I snuck in through a side door at the company that makes exactly the sort of game that I wanted to make. So I just got really lucky, especially since I lived in Wisconsin, because at that time there was basically just Raven and Human Head, I think, were the only companies that were around back then. And they weren't making the sort of games that, you know, I would not have been a valuable asset at either of those companies. So, but look around. I mean, there recently was a survey done showing like where all the different developers were in the country, and there are a ton of small companies all over the place. So even if you live in a part of the country where you think like, well, EA is not here or Blizzard's not here or whatever, like there are companies of all different sizes now springing up. Like a lot of them are not very old; they're just starting. So there may be. I just recently looked up in Madison because that's where my family lives, or they live nearby Madison. And there are a bunch of new little companies that are there. They're very successful, and they're now like some of them are over 20 or 30 people. So starting from 4 or 5. So it's look around. You might not think like there's a game development studio near you, but look around and find out what's around. Look for a way in. A lot of people use QA as a way in. I used web. That was very unusual but lucky. And yeah, make mods. Look into education. There are a lot of programs around the country now that you can look into. Yeah, but there's a lot of opportunities out there now. It might seem kind of gloom and doom because the big companies are going through, and a lot of small companies are going through a rough spell right now. But I think people are bouncing back, and things like Kickstarter are allowing these smaller companies to get moving, especially on things that are more nostalgia driven, or if they're neglected markets where people, there's a group of people. Maybe it's not a million people, but there's probably enough people to justify making something, and so there's opportunity out there.
And that's all for this week's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Should be back next week with the second part of my interview with Lori and Corey Cole. Their Kickstarter project is still coming along. Got about a little over a week left, and they still need your help. So check the show notes for Hero U Kickstarter links. I'll also post a link there to Dave Marsh's Shadowgate Kickstarter. Both of those still going. Still need your help, and I'm trying to get these guys up to their funding goal, so help me out there. As always, I want to thank you if you have donated and supported this show. It really means a lot to me, guys. It's very important and very necessary that you donate to the show if you want to keep these episodes coming. If you want to do that, you can sign up for a $1 a week or $5 a month plan. Just go to armchairarcade.com, look for the Matt Chat links, and you're good to go. Now, what about that ale of the week? All right, so the ale of the week is a Circus Boy, the Hefeweizen. This comes out of Magic Hat Brewing Company in, looks like South Burlington, Vermont. It's got 4.5% alcohol, so a good beer if you want to have a protracted night of gaming. You can probably drink 2 or 3 of these before you start to notice any ill effects. Unfiltered, unfettered, Circus Boy is cloudy by nature. So, sounds good. Went ahead and poured this into the old drinking hoard here, and let's give it a smell. Quite lemony. A lot of citrus coming through there, what you'd expect with a Hefeweizen. Actually smells really good, kind of like an orange. Let's give it a sip here. Give it another taste. This is tasting like a Budweiser to me. The Hefeweizen indeed. No, I'll give it one more chance here. Yes, unfortunately this is I'm getting that sort of cereal-like flakes, corn flakes-like taste that you get with something like a Budweiser or a Bud Light. Not really tasting any of the Hefeweizen, any of that sort of weedy flavor that I like with a good Hefeweizen. I mean, unfortunately, this just isn't very good. I'm going to go with a 0 horns on this one. I think you'd actually be better off with a Blue Moon if you're looking for this kind of experience. So. Not the worst I've ever had, but definitely not the best of the category. Anyway, Circus Boy, he can stay in the circus as far as I'm concerned. All right, what about that quotation? The quotation for this week comes from one of my favorite historians of all time, Mr. Edward Gibbon, and it goes something like this: I am indeed rich, because my income is superior to my expenses, and my expense is equal to my wish. See you guys next week.
how to express my feelings.
Oh, I see.
Feelings.
Feelings.
Girls.
Girls.
Flowers?
Excellent. Find some. Perhaps you should also send a note.
Brilliant idea.
Something moving. Something from the heart. Something...
You'll think of something.